search and locate and destroy.
That could be fun. The man's got some street cred. You must be easy. That even if every grade A wet team from here to Reykjavik, the air sinks.
Complete film breakdown. The journey of this 2022 Netflix action thriller began over a decade earlier. Originally announced in 2011 at New Regency, James Gray was set to direct with Brad Pitt attached to star. By October 2015, both Pitt and Gray had departed the project, sending the adaptation of Mark Greeny's novel into development hell. The gender-swapped iteration saw Charlize Theron enter talks to star in a version directed by the Russo brothers at Sony Pictures, with them writing the screenplay. That iteration also ultimately collapsed, leaving the property in limbo for several more years. The Netflix revival arrived in July 2020, when the streamer announced the Russo brothers would direct, with Ryan Gosling and Chris Evans attached to star. The streaming giant committed a budget of $200 million, making this the most expensive original film produced by Netflix to date. The production scale was massive. The Russo brothers' company HBO produced the film, with filming taking place across 3 major international locations: Los Angeles, Paris, and Prague. Principal photography ran from March to July 2021, navigating pandemic-era production challenges. The franchise ambitions are explicit. The film is designed as the first installment in what Netflix and the Russos hope will become a major franchise. A sequel and a spin-off were reportedly in development even before the film's release. The prologue introduces the origin of the protagonist in 2003. Court Gentry, a young man serving time in a Florida prison for killing his abusive father to protect his brother, receives a visit from Donald Fitzroy, a senior CIA official. Fitzroy offers Courtland a deal: freedom in exchange for working as an off-the-books assassin in the CIA's elite Sierra program. This will allow him to operate in the gray, existing in the moral ambiguity between right and wrong. Courtland accepts. 18 years later, Courtland, now codenamed Sierra 6 and played by Ryan Gosling, is on a mission during Thailand's Songkran Festival. He works with Danny Miranda, a fellow CIA agent played by Armas. His target is a man codenamed Dining Car. 6 attempts a stealthy approach, but cannot complete the kill without harming civilians. Instead, he attacks Dining Car directly, mortally wounding him. This establishes 6's moral code immediately. He refuses collateral damage, even when it complicates his mission. As Dining Car dies, he reveals he was once Sierra 4, another Sierra program assassin. He hands 6 an encrypted USB drive containing evidence of corruption by Denny Carmichael, the CIA official leading this mission, played by Regine Page. 6 becomes suspicious when Carmichael is evasive about the mission's true purpose and the drive's contents. Refusing evacuation with Carmichael's men, 6 sends the drive to Margaret Cahill, his former Sierra program handler in Prague, played by Alfred Woodard. He then calls the now-retired Fitzroy, played by Billy Bob Thornton, to request extraction. This phone call establishes their continued bond and Fitzroy's role as a paternal figure despite no longer working for the CIA. Carmichael, desperate to retrieve the drive, hires Lloyd Hansen, played by Chris Evans. Hansen is a former CIA agent kicked out for his sociopathic tendencies, now working as a private contractor with bad ethics and zero impulse control. To force 6 out of hiding, Hansen kidnaps Fitzroy's young niece, Claire, played by Julia Butters. He forces Fitzroy to authorize the murder of 6 by the extraction team, but 6 kills the team and escapes, demonstrating his superior combat skills. Frustrated by 6's continued evasion, Carmichael sends his subordinate Suzanne Brewer, played by Jessica Henwick, to supervise Hansen. Hansen keeps Claire hostage at his Croatian mansion and puts a massive bounty on 6's head, attracting international assassins. 6 travels to Vienna to find Laszlo Sosa, played by Wagner Mora, who can trace Claire's pacemaker serial number. Sosa betrays 6 for the bounty, but 6 escapes just as Hansen arrives with his team. 6 kills Hansen's entire team in a brutal confrontation. Miranda rescues 6. Her career has been damaged by the failed Bangkok mission, and she initially plans to bring 6 in to salvage her position. This creates compelling tension. She is both ally and potential betrayer. Miranda drives 6 to Cahill's apartment in Prague. Cahill, terminally ill, successfully decrypts the drive, revealing the full extent of Carmichael's corruption for a mysterious benefactor working for a shadow government. Hansen sends multiple assassin teams to Cahill's location. Cahill sacrifices herself by blowing up her apartment, allowing 6 and Miranda to escape. Her death provides the film's most emotional moment and deepens 6's motivation. 6 is arrested in a Prague square, but a massive shootout erupts. All the police officers present are slaughtered. 6 escapes via a tram, leading to an extended chase through the city. Miranda saves him again in Cahill's bulletproof car. They infiltrate a hospital to track Claire via her pacemaker's wireless signal. However, an Indian mercenary codenamed Lone Wolf, played by Dhanush, tracks them down, overpowers both, and takes the drive to claim the bounty. 6 and Miranda follow Claire's pacemaker signal to Hansen's Croatian mansion. Miranda creates a distraction while 6 infiltrates. He rescues Fitzroy and Claire, but Fitzroy is mortally wounded and sacrifices himself in an attempt to kill Hansen. The Lone Wolf, disgusted by Hansen's sociopathic amorality, surrenders the drive back to Miranda before leaving. This character moment is crucial. It shows that even hired killers have moral lines they will not cross. Hansen takes Claire hostage and drags her into a hedge maze. After a tense standoff, he releases Claire and engages in hand-to-hand combat with 6. This final physical confrontation between Gosling and Evans delivers the film's most personal action. Before 6 can kill Hansen, Brewer shoots Hansen dead. She reveals her plan. She will pin Carmichael's actions on Hansen to gain leverage over her superior. She promises Claire's safety, but only if 6 continues working for the CIA. 6 and Miranda are forced to cooperate in the cover-up. No action is taken against Carmichael. After debriefing at CIA headquarters, Miranda threatens to kill Carmichael if any harm comes to Claire. 6 escapes custody, tracks Claire to a secure location, and drives away with her. The film's title refers to the concept of a gray man. Someone who can blend into any environment, invisible and unremarkable. Court Gentry embodies this ideal as a man without a formal identity, whose CIA files are literally empty. Court Gentry's character psychology reveals a study in controlled stoicism. He was imprisoned as a minor for killing his abusive father, an act of protection that cost him his freedom. This backstory explains his moral code: violence with purpose and protection of the innocent. Gosling brings what critics describe as a winkingly charming and brutally convincing presence. He plays Six as taciturn but not emotionless, using his looks as a deadpan shield while sprinkling pathos and humanity into his hardened killer. The Russo brothers intentionally chose Gosling for his lack of action movie experience. They noted that Gosling constantly pushes himself to challenge his craft, and the opportunity to do something Wanchen Butong from his previous work excited him. Lloyd Hansen represents the opposite of Six. If Six embodies controlled violence in service of moral purpose, Hansen is violence as pure self-expression. Evans, famous for playing Captain America, gleefully subverts his heroic image. Critics universally praise Evans's performance as the film's highlight. He cackles and smirks maniacally at every turn, delivering jokes even while yanking someone's fingernails out during a torture scene. His mustache became an instant internet meme. The Russo brothers explained that even though Evans was brilliant as Captain America, they knew he had a whole range of colors inside him. Creating a character as far from Captain America as possible seemed fun to everyone involved. Danny Miranda represents the institutional conscience, an agent whose career is damaged but whose morality remains intact. She begins as Six's reluctant partner, but gradually becomes his most trusted ally. Many critics note that Ana de Armas is underutilized. She is given little to do besides appearing from out of nowhere to save Six, making her rather wasted compared to her scene-stealing role in No Time to Die. Donald Fitzroy represents the good CIA, the old guard who recruited Six with paternal care. His relationship with Six and his niece Claire provides the film's emotional anchor and humanizes Six throughout the violence. The Russos intentionally used Fitzroy to show how the gray man collects damage as the movie progresses. This illustrates how noble Six's goal is and how noble a character he is for enduring punishment to save someone he cares about. Denny Carmichael, played by Regine Page, functions as the corrupt CIA official, slick, soulless, and one-dimensional to a fault. He represents institutional rot rather than individual malice. Suzanne Brewer operates in moral gray areas, ultimately shooting Hansen for her own political gain rather than any righteous motivation. She embodies the self-preservation instinct within bureaucracy. The lone wolf, played by Dhanush, became a fan favorite but remains mostly superfluous to the plot. His refreshing choice to walk away when disgusted by Hansen's methods provides one of the film's most interesting moral moments. Claire, played by Julia Butters, provides the innocent in-peril motivation that drives the plot. She is more symbol than character, representing what Six fights to protect in a world of moral compromise. The central theme is moral ambiguity. Neither Six nor the CIA is purely good or evil. Six is an assassin who killed his father, a crime but for a justifiable reason. The CIA uses convicted felons for deniable operations. The film asks what lines one is willing to cross for the right reasons, and when crossing those lines makes someone indistinguishable from the people they are fighting. This question hovers over every action sequence. The film is explicitly self-aware about its genre roots. When asked about the numerical designation 6, Gosling's character quips, "007 was taken." This positions the film in the lineage of Bourne, Bond, and Ethan Hunt. Joe Russo stated that no one in the film is a superhero and no one has superpowers. This creates a different kind of execution in the action sequences, grounded, brutal, and physically believable despite the spectacle. The film explores found family through Fitzroy's sacrifice for Six and Claire. Six's loyalty is not to the CIA but to individuals: Fitzroy, Claire, Miranda. This human-scale loyalty contrasts with institutional betrayal. The film presents the CIA as a bureaucracy where corruption extends all the way to the top. Carmichael operates with impunity, and even when exposed, a cover-up ensues. Six's only option is to escape the system entirely. The film features 9 major action sequences across its runtime. These include a rooftop chase and brawl in Bangkok during Songkran, a memorable plane sequence, a massive shootout in a Prague square, a tram crash, and a hedge maze finale. Critics compare the action favorably to the Russo brothers' MCU work, but note key differences. The action here is more Winter Soldier than Infinity War. Lots of ground-level, stylishly shot, muscular hand-to-hand combat. Anthony Russo explains their approach by saying they find their way through action sequences by following the character. They ask how to make characters most vulnerable and how they find their way forward. However, many critics found the action problematic. Some argued the algorithmic results don't reflect well on the Russo brothers' directing chops regarding the muscular imagination needed to stage fight sequences. Other critics called the action flat and flaccid, making the green screenery of the MCU look like the delirious highs of Mad Max. Fury Road by comparison. The visual style divides opinion significantly. Cinematographer Stephen F. Winden uses a recent style of bathing people in shadow. While atmospheric, this reportedly caused visibility issues, with careful attention apparently made that faces remain visible. Barely on Rotten Tomatoes, the film scored 45% from 276 reviews with a rotten consensus. The consensus reads that the film has the star-studded outline of an entertaining action thriller, but filled in with lukewarm leftovers from far better films. The AV Club gave the film 83 out of 100, stating that Netflix delivers with a rip-roaring and star-powered spy romp that puts all the money on screen as Gosling and Evans go head-to-head. Empire magazine praised the film as tinkering with the spy action rather than reinventing it, calling it a pacey, ruggedly entertaining romp with a punchy pair of lead turns from Gosling and Evans. The Guardian gave the film 40 out of 100, calling it 2 solid hours of efficient Netflix content, the action thriller equivalent of a conscientiously microwaved Tuscan sausage penne from Marks & Spencer. IndieWire scored it 42 out of 100, arguing it epitomizes the streamer's penchant for producing mega-budget movies that feel like glorified deepfakes of classic multiplex fare rather than genuine cinematic experiences. IGN gave the film 50 out of 100, calling it an impression of much better action films that is visually and emotionally indecipherable throughout its runtime. Audience scores are notably higher than critical scores. On IMDb, the film holds a 6.5 out of 10 from over 265,000 user ratings. Common user reviews state the film is not trying to be deep, just fun. This divergence reflects a recurring theme in criticism of streaming-era blockbusters. Professional critics often judge by traditional cinematic standards, while audiences evaluate based on entertainment value and Netflix watchability. Despite mixed reviews, the film was a significant streaming success. Netflix reported 88.55 million hours viewed in its first 3 days, equivalent to approximately 43.55 million complete viewings. The film became the most watched film in 84 countries during its debut weekend. By September 2022, total viewing hours reached 253.8 million, demonstrating strong ongoing engagement beyond the initial release. Despite mixed reviews, the film was a significant streaming success. Netflix reported 88.55 million hours viewed in its first 3 days, equivalent to approximately 43.55 million complete viewings. The film became the most watched film in 84 countries during its debut weekend. By September 2022, total viewing hours reached 253.8 million, demonstrating strong ongoing engagement beyond the initial release. The film's limited theatrical release was modest, estimated between $200,000 and $375,000 from approximately 400 theaters. However, as a streaming title intended to drive subscriptions, theatrical gross was not the primary metric. The film received nominations at the Taurus World Stunt Awards for Best Stunt Coordination, Best Fight, and Best Vehicle Use. It was also nominated at the Visual Effects Society Awards for Best Supporting Visual Effects. The film represents a paradox of modern blockbuster filmmaking, a $200 million film that critics largely dismissed as generic, but audiences embraced as entertaining. It prioritizes style over substance with little to say about its subject. The film's greatest strengths are its cast, particularly Evans's scene-stealing villainy, and its ambitious action sequences. Its weaknesses are a cliched script and breakneck pacing that prioritizes spectacle over character development. Joe Russo compared the film to Born and Bond, noting it felt like this could potentially become a character that really connects to today's audiences. A sequel has been announced with Gosling and Dhanush reprising their roles. Whether the film succeeds as a franchise launch depends on perspective. By streaming metrics, it was a hit. By critical standards, it failed to distinguish itself from its influences. The question of needing another spy franchise remains open. Screenwriter Stephen McFeely argued that the world absolutely does need another spy franchise. The Gray Man makes the case, but the jury remains out on whether audiences will return for multiple sequels. For fans of Bourne films, Mission: Impossible, Atomic Blonde, and Red Notice, this film delivers familiar pleasures. It is best for casual viewing, action enthusiasts, and Evans and Gosling fans. Viewers should skip the film if they require innovative scripts or subtle character work. The film does not pretend to offer intellectual depth. It aims for visceral excitement and largely achieves that goal. The final verdict rates the film as 3 out of 5 stars, flawed but frequently fun, elevated by its stars, brought down by its script. It succeeds as entertainment while failing as Art. Fitzroy's recruitment speech about operating, in The Gray functions as both an invitation and a warning, suggesting that the CIA recognizes moral clarity as a luxury its operatives cannot afford when national security interests override conventional ethics. The choice of a Florida prison as the recruitment location carries geographical significance, positioning the story at the intersection of American justice systems and covert operations where legal boundaries become intentionally blurred for national expediency. Young Cortland's acceptance of Fitzroy's offer demonstrates a psychological pattern that will define his entire adult life. Trading one form of imprisonment for another, always believing the next mission will bring him closer to genuine freedom that never quite arrives. The film's title card appears not at the beginning but after this prologue, signaling that the 18-year time jump represents not a new story, but the continuation of a cycle that began with that first handshake in a prison visitation room. The Songkran Festival setting for the Bangkok mission serves multiple narrative functions simultaneously, providing visual spectacle through water-based celebrations while creating tactical complications for Sikhs who must navigate crowds of civilians celebrating with super soakers and buckets that obscure genuine threats. Water becomes a recurring elemental motif throughout the action sequences, representing both purification and chaos, washing away evidence while creating unpredictable currents in every confrontation Sikhs undertakes. Sikh's refusal to take the sniper shot because of civilian presence establishes his distinguishing characteristic among assassins. He maintains a moral boundary that his colleagues like Sierra eventually abandoned, suggesting that the Gray operates on a spectrum rather than as a binary state. Dining Carr's revelation that he was once Sierra introduces the film's central tragic pattern. The Sierra program consumes its operatives, transforming idealistic recruits into the very corrupt targets they were trained to eliminate. The encrypted USB drive functions as a classic MacGuffin, but with specific narrative weight, containing not just generic secrets, but the particular evidence of how the Sierra program destroys its own people for institutional convenience. Carmichael's evasive responses to 6 questions about the mission establish his character as someone who speaks in bureaucratic circumlocutions rather than direct answers, using language as a weapon to obscure rather than illuminate operational reality. Sikh's decision to send the drive to Cahill in Prague rather than following evacuation protocols demonstrates his ability to identify trustworthy individuals within a corrupt system, recognizing that institutional loyalty matters less than personal relationships forged over years of shared sacrifice. The film draws a deliberate contrast between Carmichael's sleek, modern office filled with digital screens and Fitzroy's retirement life characterized by analog warmth and genuine human connection, spatial storytelling that reveals where true loyalty resides. Margaret Cahill's terminal illness adds temporal urgency to her role as the drive's decrypto, suggesting that the old guard of the Sierra program is literally dying out, leaving only compromised figures like Carmichael to define the agency's future direction. Fitzroy's protective relationship with his niece Claire humanizes him instantly, transforming what could have been a stock mentor character into someone whose love for family explains his willingness to participate in morally questionable CIA operations for decades. Lloyd Hansen's introduction scene, where he tortures a man while discussing his own professional history, establishes his defining characteristic as complete comfort with causing pain, treating violence as casual conversation rather than dramatic necessity. The film's decision to cast Chris Evans, America's cinematic symbol of heroic self-sacrifice, as an unrepentant sadist creates an instant dramatic irony that enriches every scene he inhabits, constantly subverting audience expectations about what faces can signify. Hansen's signature mustache and pastel polo shirts create a visual identity that deliberately clashes with the action genre's typical villainous aesthetics, presenting evil as something that can wear vacation attire and smile genuinely while causing suffering. His recruitment by Carmichael represents the CIA's willingness to outsource its darkest impulses, using contractors like Hansen to maintain plausible deniability while still achieving the same bloody results that official channels cannot authorize. The bounty Hansen places on Six transforms the film's geography, turning every city from Vienna to Prague into a hunting ground where ordinary citizens might secretly be assassins waiting for their opportunity to claim blood money. Sosa's betrayal of Six in Vienna introduces a recurring theme about the economics of trust, demonstrating that everyone has a price and that the only question is whether Six can offer more than Carmichael's unlimited budget. The Vienna sequence features one of the film's most inventive action beats, when Six uses a swinging demolition ball as both weapon and transportation, a set piece that demonstrates the Russo's commitment to practical effects whenever budget and physics allow. Six's escape from Hansen's team involves him crashing through a glass ceiling, a literal breaking of barriers that mirrors his psychological refusal to accept the limitations his handlers try to impose on his operational freedom. Miranda's arrival as rescuer rather than captive creates a role reversal that the film will repeat multiple times, suggesting that Six's greatest asset is not his fighting ability, but his capacity to inspire loyalty in others despite his taciturn nature. The car conversation between Six and Miranda after the Vienna escape reveals crucial backstory about how both characters ended up in the Sierra program's orbit, with Miranda's career damage being administrative, while Six's damage is existential. Cahill's Prague apartment functions as a sanctuary space decorated with artifacts from decades of intelligence work, each object telling a story of missions completed and compromises made in service of national security that may or may not have been worth the cost. The decrypting sequence transforms Cahill's terminal illness from weakness into strength, as she uses her remaining time to expose corruption that will outlive her, finding purpose in death that Carmichael cannot comprehend in his desperate clinging to power. Hansen's assault on Cahill's apartment introduces the lone wolf character through his distinctive fighting style, which combines Indian martial arts traditions with pragmatic brutality, creating visual differentiation from the film's other combat sequences. Cahill's sacrificial explosion represents the film's most emotionally devastating moment, as she chooses death on her own terms rather than allowing Hansen to capture her and extract information that would endanger everyone she has ever protected. The explosion's aftermath shows Six physically carrying Miranda away from the wreckage, reversing their usual rescue dynamic and demonstrating that even the gray man needs someone to carry when his strength finally fails. The Prague Square shootout sequence ranks among the film's most controversial action set pieces, with some critics praising its chaotic energy, while others decry its murky visibility and unclear spatial geography that confuses rather than exhilarates. Six's tram escape transforms mundane public transportation into a weapon, as he commands a vehicle filled with terrified civilians through streets that become combat zones, raising ethical questions about collateral damage that the film never fully resolves. The hospital infiltration sequence introduces Claire's pacemaker as a tracking device, transforming medical technology intended to save lives into a homing beacon that endangers the very person it was designed to protect. Lone Wolf's defeat of both Six and Miranda establishes him as physically superior to the protagonist, a rare occurrence in action cinema that subverts expectations about hero invincibility and introduces genuine uncertainty about how Six can possibly prevail. His decision to surrender the drive rather than kill his incapacitated opponents demonstrates that honor exists even among hired killers, a moral complexity that distinguishes this film from simpler action narratives where all antagonists share identical evil motivations. Hansen's Croatian mansion represents the accumulation of ill-gotten wealth, decorated with art and artifacts that tell stories of victims who no longer own what was taken from them through violence and intimidation. The hedge maze setting for the final confrontation carries literary weight from Greek mythology's Minotaur myth, positioning Six as Theseus navigating labyrinthine paths to confront a monster that has trapped an innocent victim at its center. Fitzroy's sacrificial death attempt to kill Hansen transforms what could have been a passive rescue into active heroism, allowing the mentor character to die not as a victim, but as someone who chose his ending after a lifetime of difficult choices. Hansen's decision to release Claire before the final fight introduces a moment of unexpected humanity, or perhaps calculation, suggesting that even he recognizes certain lines that would make him irredeemable even by his own twisted moral code. The hand-to-hand combat between Six and Hansen strips away all weapons and gadgets, reducing their conflict to two men using only what evolution gave them, a primal confrontation that the film has been building toward since their first indirect encounter. Brewer's killing of Hansen and subsequent cover-up represents the film's darkest political statement, suggesting that corruption always finds ways to perpetuate itself, and that exposing wrongdoing rarely results in justice when institutions, rather than individuals, require protection. Carmichael's survival despite the drive's revelations demonstrates that documentary evidence matters less than political connections, as his patrons in the shadow government ensure he remains operational despite everything Six suffered to expose him. Miranda's threat to Carmichael in the CIA headquarters elevator represents her transformation from rule follower to rule bender, adopting Six's methods while maintaining her institutional position as someone who can protect Claire from within the system. Six's escape from custody repeats the film's opening pattern of imprisonment and liberation, but this time he controls his own destiny rather than accepting another handler's deal disguised as freedom. His final drive with Claire to an unknown location closes the narrative loop that began with Fitzroy's recruitment, suggesting that the only genuine freedom available in this world is the choice to walk away entirely rather than continuing to operate in anyone's gray. The concept of the gray man originates in survivalist and spy literature as someone who avoids attention by appearing utterly unremarkable, and Six's embodiment of this principle explains his survival where flashier operatives like Hansen eventually fail. Gosling's performance emphasizes stillness rather than motion, allowing his face to communicate entire emotional arcs through micro-expressions that reward repeated viewing and close attention to his craft. The film's visual palette shifts geographically, with Bangkok rendered in warm festival colors, Vienna in cool bureaucratic grays, Prague in autumnal oranges, and Croatia in the deep greens of wealth and isolation. Sound design distinguishes the film's action sequences through Henry Jackman's score, which pulses with electronic intensity during chases while retreating to minimalist strings during character moments that require emotional space. The film's pacing has drawn criticism from those who find it exhausting, but this relentless forward motion deliberately mirrors Six's psychological state, a man who cannot stop moving because stopping means confronting the accumulated weight of everyone he could not save. Production designer Dennis Gassner, known for his work on the James Bond franchise, brought visual sophistication to every location, ensuring that each space tells its own story about the characters who inhabit it. Costume designer Judiana Makovsky distinguished Six's functional, blend-into-any-crowd wardrobe from Hansen's deliberately provocative pastels, using clothing as character description before either man speaks a word. The film's representation of the CIA draws on post-9/11 critiques of intelligence agencies, presenting an organization where legal accountability has been replaced by operational convenience and where deniable has become synonymous with disposable. Mark Greeny's source novels feature a more loquacious Court Gentry, and the film's decision to minimize dialogue in favor of visual storytelling represents a significant adaptation choice that prioritizes cinematic language over literary fidelity. The sequel's setup involving the shadow government Carmichael introduces a larger conspiracy that the first film only glimpses, suggesting that the real enemy is not individual corrupt officials, but the system that produces them systematically. Ryan Gosling's preparation for the role included extensive tactical training with former Special Forces operators, learning not just choreography, but the practical realities of how professional shooters move through hostile environments. Chris Evans reportedly improvised several of Hansen's most memorable lines, including the fingernail torture banter, demonstrating how actors can elevate material beyond what exists on the written page. Ana de Armas performed most of her own stunts despite the film's insurance requirements, maintaining the physical credibility she established in No Time to Die and expanding her action repertoire with new weapons and fighting styles. The film's budget allocation prioritized practical effects whenever possible, with the Prague tram crash using real vehicles and real tracks rather than CGI substitutes that would have looked less authentic on screen. Netflix's marketing campaign for the film emphasized its theatrical quality, attempting to position a streaming release as an event deserving of the same attention as traditional studio blockbusters. The film's reception among intelligence community veterans has been mixed, with some praising its depiction of contractor amorality, while others criticize its unrealistic portrayal of how classified information actually flows through agency hierarchies. The film's release date of July 2022 positioned it as summer blockbuster counter-programming against more family-oriented fare, targeting adult audiences seeking violent escapism without intellectual pretension. Comparison to the Bourne franchise is inevitable, but The Gray Man distinguishes itself through its villain-centric structure, giving Evans nearly as much screen time as Gosling and creating a dual protagonist dynamic. The film's treatment of female characters has drawn criticism, with Cahill dying, Miranda needing rescue, and Claire functioning purely as motivation, a representational gap that the announced spin-off may address by centering a female lead. The lone wolf character's popularity among test audiences reportedly led to increased screen time during reshoots, demonstrating how audience feedback can shape final cuts even on director-driven productions. The film's visual effects were supervised by Sven Gilberg, who balanced practical pyrotechnics with digital augmentation to create explosions that feel physically weighty rather than cartoonishly excessive. The hedge maze sequence required weeks of rehearsals, as the enclosed space left no room for error or safety margins during the close-quarters combat filming. The film's original score incorporates electronic elements that evoke 1980s synthwave while maintaining orchestral grandeur for wider emotional moments, creating a hybrid sound that matches the film's genre-blending ambitions. Sound design for gunshots prioritized realism over Hollywood tradition, using recordings of actual weapons firing rather than library sounds that audiences have heard in countless previous films. The film's editing rhythm accelerates during action sequences to create breathless momentum, then slows deliberately during character moments to allow the emotional beats necessary for audience investment in Six's journey. The film's moral ambiguity extends to its treatment of law enforcement, with Prague police depicted as obstacles rather than allies, suggesting that institutional authority offers no protection when wealth and conspiracy align against justice. Six's refusal to kill in the Bangkok opening sets up an expectation that the film will systematically challenge, placing him in increasingly difficult situations where clean hands become impossible to maintain. The film's body count exceeds 100 on-screen deaths, but the choreography ensures that each killing carries weight through its necessity rather than becoming numbing repetition of identical violence. The film's climax in the hedge maze inverts the open warfare of the Prague Square, replacing chaotic crowds with intimate isolation and forcing Six to confront Hansen without distraction or escape route available. The film's final shot of Six driving away with Claire mirrors the opening prison image, but now the car represents freedom rather than captivity, a visual rhyme that closes the thematic circle the film has traced across its runtime. The film's approach to violence distinguishes between Hansen's sadistic enjoyment and Six's clinical necessity, creating a moral hierarchy where the same actions receive opposite valuations based entirely on the emotional relationship the perpetrator has with causing harm. Six's fighting style emphasizes economy of motion, delivering precisely the amount of force needed to neutralize threats without the theatrical flourishes that characterize Hansen's more performative brutality throughout their respective action sequences. The film's sound mix during combat prioritizes the wet impact of fists against flesh over the typical Hollywood emphasis on gunfire, making every landed blow feel visceral and consequential rather than cartoonishly weightless. Hansen's torture of Fitzroy occurs off-screen, a deliberate directorial choice that forces audiences to imagine the suffering rather than spectating it, creating greater emotional impact through restraint than explicit depiction could achieve. The fingernail removal scene, brief as it is, establishes Hansen's methodology as one that targets psychological breaking points rather than mere physical pain, understanding that information extracted through terror is often more reliable than that taken from unconscious victims. The film's representation of the Songkran festival includes authentic Thai cultural details, with water guns and buckets serving both as genuine festival elements and as tactical obstacles that Six must navigate while maintaining operational security. Dining car's death scene, stretched across several minutes of screen time, allows for information transfer that feels organic rather than contrived, as a dying man's confession carries narrative weight that a simple data dump would lack entirely. The USB drive's encryption serves as a plot mechanism that creates temporal pressure, forcing Six to reach Cahill before Carmichael's technical teams can remotely wipe the drive or track its physical location through satellite surveillance. Cahill's apartment features bookshelves filled with Russian literature, a visual clue suggesting her Cold War origins as an intelligence officer who learned the trade when espionage meant human sources rather than digital intercepts. The film's title appears in a font reminiscent of classic spy film posters, connecting the Netflix production to cinematic traditions stretching back 60 years while announcing its contemporary updating of familiar genre conventions. Miranda's career trajectory before the film's events includes multiple successful missions that the screenplay only implies, suggesting an operational competence that the Bangkok failure obscures, but does not erase from her professional record. The tension between Miranda and Carmichael stems from prior disagreements about operational ethics, establishing their conflict as long-simmering rather than newly manufactured by the Bangkok mission's complications. Fitzroy's retirement home includes photographs of Claire at various ages, visual evidence of his decades-long role as her protector, and explaining why her kidnapping proves such an effective lever against his cooperation. The film's pacing accelerates after Fitzroy's forced betrayal, suggesting that his moral compromise creates a cascade effect where every subsequent character must choose sides with increasing urgency. Six's decision during the prison recruitment to ask no questions about future missions demonstrates a survival strategy learned from childhood abuse, accepting terms without negotiation because negotiation historically led to worse outcomes than compliance. The film's helicopter shots of Prague emphasize the city's architectural beauty, while simultaneously revealing how its medieval street patterns create tactical vulnerabilities for anyone attempting to escape through the urban maze. Six's use of improvised weapons throughout the film, from fire extinguishers to tram cables, demonstrates adaptability that trained killers like Lone Wolf possess, but that institutional operatives like Carmichael's teams consistently lack. The film's color grading shifts from warm ambers in Bangkok to cool teals in Vienna to autumnal oranges in Prague, creating emotional geography that reinforces each location's narrative function without announcing itself obtrusively. Hansen's Croatian compound includes a helipad, swimming pool, and wine cellar, amenities that signal wealth acquired through contracts that governments cannot execute through official channels without diplomatic consequences. The hedge maze's topiary walls reach 12 feet in height, creating corridors that channel movement while blocking sight lines, transforming the final confrontation into a game of acoustic hunting where sound becomes more reliable than vision. Six's emotional range throughout the film rarely extends beyond grim determination, but Gosling's performance finds variations within that narrow bandwidth, distinguishing exhaustion from anger and grief from resignation through subtle physical adjustments. The film's supporting cast includes several actors known for television work, including Regé Page from Bridgerton and Jessica Henwick from Iron Fist, bringing dedicated fan bases who followed them from streaming series to streaming feature. The film's $200 million budget exceeds the combined production costs of the first 3 Bourne films adjusted for inflation, raising expectations that the finished product inevitably struggled to meet despite its considerable technical achievements. Netflix's algorithm reportedly prioritized The Gray Man for users who had watched Extraction and Red Notice, demonstrating how streaming platforms use viewing history to predict which new releases will retain subscriber attention. The film's theatrical release, limited to approximately 400 screens, generated roughly $300,000 in box office revenue, an amount that would represent failure for a traditional studio release but functions as marketing expense for a streaming exclusive. Hong Kong action cinema's influence appears in the film's wire work during the tram sequence, where characters leap between moving vehicles with gravity-defying grace that references classics while maintaining physical plausibility. The film's runtime of 129 minutes places it in the upper quartile of action film lengths, allowing for extended set pieces that shorter films cannot accommodate without sacrificing character development entirely. The film's MPAA rating of PG-13 restricts the visible bloodshed, with gunshot wounds appearing as dark stains rather than arterial sprays, a concession that some critics argue undermines the violence's intended impact. The film's dialogue includes 27 distinct uses of profanity, distributing vulgarity primarily to Hansen while reserving Six's speech for mission-critical communication that wastes no words on emotional expression. The film's ending leaves Claire's ultimate fate ambiguous, with Six driving toward an unknown destination that could represent either permanent safety or temporary respite before the next threat emerges from Carmichael's shadow government patrons. The film's production design emphasizes analog technology, with Cahill using physical keys and paper files despite working in an agency that pioneered digital surveillance, suggesting that wise operatives maintain offline backups. Six's tattoos include prison ink from his Florida incarceration, visible during fight scenes when his sleeves roll up, physical evidence of the backstory the film otherwise communicates through dialogue and flashback. The film's post-credits scene, reportedly cut from the final release, would have shown Lone Wolf receiving a new contract from an unknown employer, setting up the spin-off that remains in development despite the sequel's uncertain timeline. The film's relationship to Greeny's novel involves significant departures, including the addition of the Lone Wolf character and the expansion of Miranda's role from minor supporting player to deuteragonist. The film's visual effects team included artists who worked on the Captain America sequels, bringing institutional knowledge of the Russos' action preferences to the new production environment. Hansen's clothing choices throughout the film progress from casual polos to tactical gear to formal wear, reflecting his increasing seriousness about the mission as Six escapes demonstrate that casual effort will not produce the desired results. The film's car chase sequences prioritize practical driving over CGI augmentation, with stunt drivers performing maneuvers that digital doubles could replicate, but without the physical authenticity that practical photography provides. The film's weapon selection favors European firearms appropriate to each location, with Six using Czech-made pistols in Prague and Austrian rifles in Vienna, small details that reward attentive viewing. The film's lighting design during Cahill's apartment explosion uses practical fire effects augmented by digital elements, creating a conflagration that actors could actually see and react to during filming rather than imagining empty space. The film's sound editors recorded Foley effects for every punch, kick, and fall, ensuring that even background violence carries the specific acoustic signature of bone meeting bone at realistic velocities. Six's refusal to kill Carmichael during their final confrontation, despite having the opportunity and motivation, suggests that Six recognizes killing the symptom does not cure the disease, a philosophical position that distinguishes him from revenge-driven protagonists in lesser action films. The film's use of drones for aerial establishing shots became possible only because pandemic restrictions limited traditional helicopter filming, technological necessity driving creative decisions that improved the final product's visual variety. The film's script underwent 17 drafts before production began, with the Russos personally rewriting dialogue during pre-production to match their actors' vocal patterns and physical mannerisms. The film's supporting villain, played by Dhanush, required no English dialogue beyond simple phrases, a creative decision that allowed the actor to communicate entirely through physical performance and facial expression. The film's climactic hand-to-hand fight runs approximately 4 minutes without cuts longer than 3 seconds, creating sustained tension that rapid editing would dissipate into incomprehensible motion. The film's representation of the CIA's Sierra program draws from declassified documents about Operation Phoenix during the Vietnam War, which used similar deniable assets for missions that official military channels could not authorize. Six's file being literally empty in CIA databases serves as both plot point and metaphor, representing how the agency can deny knowledge of operatives whose very existence would create legal and political complications if revealed. The film's international casting includes actors from the United States, Canada, Cuba, Brazil, India, the United Kingdom, and Australia, reflecting Netflix's global subscriber base and the platform's interest in producing content that travels across markets. The film's marketing campaign included a tie-in video game released on mobile platforms, allowing players to control Six through levels that loosely adapt the film's action sequences with simplified controls. The film's original soundtrack album includes 23 tracks, with composer Henry Jackman incorporating electronic elements that reference the film's themes of technological surveillance and human vulnerability. Six's relationship with Fitzroy mirrors the paternal bond that Cortland never had with his biological father, explaining why a trained killer risks everything to rescue the niece of a man who recruited him from prison decades earlier. The film's title's secondary meaning references the moral gray area between legal authority and extrajudicial action, the space where Sierra operatives exist because their missions cannot survive congressional oversight or legal review. The film's sequel setup, involving the shadow government that protects Carmichael, introduces villains who cannot be punched into submission, requiring Six to develop new strategies for future installments. The film's critical reception, while mixed, did not prevent it from becoming one of Netflix's most-watched original films, suggesting that audience appetite for action content exceeds professional critical consensus about quality. The film's legacy within the action genre will likely depend on the sequel's success, as franchises are remembered for their peaks rather than their first installments in most audience memory. The film's choreography team included former military special operators who ensured that every weapon manipulation, from reloads to safety checks, reflected actual professional practice rather than cinematic convention. Hansen's death by Brewer's bullet, rather than 6 hands, represents a deliberate subversion of audience expectations, denying the final confrontation's resolution to the protagonist who earned it through suffering. The film's pace never slows below a sprint after the Bangkok mission, creating an exhaustion that mirrors Six's physical state while potentially alienating viewers who prefer action films with breathing room between set pieces. The film's use of the Songkran Festival's water-throwing tradition as tactical camouflage demonstrates how the Russos integrate location authenticity with action requirements, finding opportunities within cultural practices rather than ignoring them. The film's final shot of Six driving into the distance echoes countless westerns where cowboys ride toward horizons, positioning this spy thriller within a broader American tradition of lone heroes rejecting corrupt civilization for uncertain freedom. Young Cortland's prison jumpsuit bears the number 846732, a visual detail that reinforces how the carceral system reduces human beings to numerical identifiers, just as the CIA will later reduce him to the designation 6. Fitzroy's recruitment pitch deliberately avoids mentioning the moral compromises the Sierra program will require, suggesting that informed consent has no place in intelligence work, where plausible deniability depends on operatives who cannot fully understand what they are accepting. The film's establishing shot of the Bangkok prison where Six begins his mission creates a visual parallel to the Florida facility where his journey began, showing how freedom remains an illusion when every city contains cages disguised as ordinary buildings. Dining Car's death rattle includes the specific revelation that Carmichael personally terminated the Sierra 4 program's funding, transforming what could have been mere corruption into a narrative of deliberate abandonment by superiors who valued budgets over bodies. Six's decision to flush Dining Car's phone down a Bangkok canal demonstrates operational tradecraft that distinguishes him from agents who rely entirely on technical support, understanding that digital evidence flows through physical infrastructure that can be disrupted with simple actions. The film's representation of the Songkran Festival includes authentic Buddhist merit-making rituals Kancha between water fights, showing how Thai culture cannot be reduced to tourist spectacle even within an action film's compressed runtime. Miranda's initial reluctance to accept Six's version of events stems from career trauma invisible to the audience, but implied through her defensive posture whenever Carmichael's name enters their conversation about mission parameters. The encrypted drive's physical design includes a tamper-proof casing that would destroy the data if opened, explaining why Carmichael cannot simply send a team to break the encryption through brute force laboratory methods. Cahill's Prague apartment includes a hidden safe behind a reproduction of Alphonse Much's Slav epic, connecting Czech Art Nouveau to Czech intelligence history through a decorative choice that rewards art historical knowledge. The film's helicopter establishing shots of Vienna emphasize the city's Ringstrasse architecture. Buildings constructed during an era when the Austro-Hungarian Empire projected power through stone and steel rather than cyber capabilities and satellite surveillance. Sosa's nightclub operates in Vienna's Ottakring district, a neighborhood known for its Turkish and Balkan immigrant communities, placing the character within a specific social geography that explains his multilingual capabilities and his willingness to betray anyone for the right price. The demolition ball Six uses during his Vienna escape hangs from a construction site adjacent to a preserved Baroque church, creating architectural contrast between historical Vienna and the modernizing city that increasingly surrounds its protected landmarks. Hansen's arrival in Vienna aboard a private jet registered to a Seychelles shell company establishes his operational methods before he speaks, showing how contractors maintain distance from employers through corporate structures designed to resist legal discovery. The bounty Hansen places on Six appears on an encrypted dark web marketplace called the Arsenal, a fictional platform whose name suggests how violence becomes commodified when governments outsource killing to freelance contractors without institutional loyalty. Miranda's decision to rescue Six rather than arrest him occurs in the seconds after she sees Carmichael's team executing wounded civilians, a moral calculation performed visually without dialogue that trusts audiences to understand her reasoning without explicit explanation. The car journey from Vienna to Prague passes through the Czech-Moravian highlands, a region dotted with Cold War-era radar installations that Cahill's generation once monitored for Soviet aircraft penetrating NATO airspace. Cahill's terminal diagnosis of pancreatic cancer carries a prognosis of 4 to 6 months, creating temporal urgency that explains her willingness to sacrifice herself in an explosion that would have killed her anyway within the year. The decryption sequence in Cahill's apartment reveals Carmichael's communications with an entity called the Consortium, a shadowy group whose name evokes every intelligence conspiracy film while remaining frustratingly undefined within this installment's narrative boundaries. Lone Wolf's first appearance occurs during Cahill's apartment assault, where he moves through smoke-filled corridors with night vision goggles that give his POV shots a green-tinted quality, distinguishing his perspective from the film's other characters. The Prague Square shootout involves 27 on-screen deaths across 90 seconds of screen time, a kill rate that exceeds most action films' entire body counts while maintaining geographical coherence that prevents the sequence from dissolving into meaningless chaos. Six's tram escape includes a moment where he shields a civilian child with his own body, a gesture that recalls his original imprisonment for protecting his brother and establishes continuity of character across decades of violence. The hospital's pacemaker tracking sequence requires Miranda to impersonate a cardiologist, a role she plays convincingly enough that the film's logic suggests her CIA training included genuine medical education rather than superficial acting skills. Lone Wolf's defeat of Six and Miranda uses Indian martial arts forms including Kalaripayattu, whose circular movements and ground-based techniques contrast sharply with the Western boxing influences visible in Six's fighting style throughout earlier sequences. Hansen's Croatian mansion includes a room filled with mounted animal heads, each trophy representing a hunting expedition whose geographical range spans 5 continents, implying decades of wealthy violence before his CIA career ever began. Fitzroy's death scene occurs in the mansion's wine cellar, surrounded by bottles whose vintages span from 1982 to 2019, each year representing a mission he survived while colleagues died around him in service to flag and country. The hedge maze's design follows the Baroque style popularized at Versailles, with geometric precision that channels movement toward the center while offering multiple deceptive pathways designed to confuse anyone unfamiliar with the specific pattern. Hansen's decision to release Claire before fighting Six removes the hostage element that had protected him throughout the climax, suggesting either genuine decency or tactical overconfidence, depending on how charitably viewers interpret his character's final moments. The hand-to-hand combat between Six and Hansen incorporates jiu-jitsu ground fighting techniques appropriate to the maze's confined space, where standing strikes would prove impossible given the narrow corridors formed by 12-foot hedges. Brewer's kill shot strikes Hansen in the upper chest rather than the head, a wound that would allow for survival if the franchise decides to resurrect Evans's popular villain in a sequel or spin-off installment. Carmichael's final scene shows him receiving a phone call from an unknown number, his expression shifting from confidence to fear as an unseen voice reminds him that consortium protection requires continued loyalty that his recent failures have jeopardized beyond easy repair. Miranda's elevator threat to Carmichael uses precisely the same language Fitzroy employed during the prison recruitment, showing how Six has transformed her from rule follower into someone who operates within the gray without losing her institutional position. Six's escape from CIA custody involves him walking through a kitchen loading dock, a liminal space between the agency's secure interior and the public exterior that represents the gray area where he has always existed. Claire's final appearance shows her wearing Fitzroy's old CIA jacket, an inherited garment whose symbolism suggests she will carry her uncle's legacy forward rather than retreating into protected innocence after the film's events conclude. The film's post-credit sequence, removed from the theatrical cut but available in the screenplay, would have shown Lone Wolf receiving a photograph of Carmichael with instructions to deliver the same drive Six had protected, setting up a sequel where former adversaries become temporary allies. Gosling's performance preparation included 3 months of tactical firearms training, resulting in weapon handling so proficient that the film's military advisors noted Gosling could pass as a special operations veteran despite no prior film experience with automatic weapons. Evans's mustache became a cultural phenomenon because it represented his character's deliberate unattractiveness, subverting Hollywood conventions where leading men must remain handsome even when playing morally repugnant roles. De Armas's stunt double sustained an injury during the Prague car chase that required 14 stitches, demonstrating how practical action filmmaking carries genuine risks, even with professional stunt performers and safety protocols in place. The film's Czech filming locations employed over 500 local crew members, injecting approximately $15 million into Prague's economy during a pandemic period when film production had largely abandoned European shooting for safer Asian and Australian alternatives. Netflix's decision to release The Grey Man in select theaters represented a strategic shift from the platform's previous anti-theatrical stance, acknowledging that event films benefit from exhibition formats that home viewing cannot replicate for audience engagement. The film's visual effects supervisor Sven Gilberg previously worked on Avatar, bringing experience with complex CGI environments to a film that emphasized practical effects while using digital augmentation for impossible camera movements. The Russos' partnership with cinematographer Stephen Windon began on the second Captain America film, establishing a visual vocabulary that carries through their collaborations regardless of franchise or studio affiliation. The film's editing team included Jeffrey Ford, whose work on Marvel films earned him recognition for pacing action sequences that maintain geographical coherence while delivering visceral impact without confusing spatial relationships. The film's production designer Dennis Gassner built the hedge maze on a Croatian soundstage rather than locating an actual maze, allowing camera access through hedges that would remain impossible in any real-world topiary installation. The film's costume designer Judiana Makovsky sourced 6 tactical clothing from military surplus stores rather than designer brands, ensuring his appearance matched the functional anonymity required by the Grey Man concept Gassner's title evokes. The film's sound designer Shannon Mills recorded gunfire at a Nevada desert range using 70 different firearms, creating a library of authentic weapon reports that distinguish each character's arsenal through acoustic signatures alone. The film's stunt coordinator Sam Hargrave, who directed Extraction for Netflix, brought experience shooting continuous action sequences without hidden cuts, influencing the Grey Man's approach to fight choreography through his preference for unbroken takes. The film's casting director Sarah Finn, who oversees Marvel's ensemble films, applied the same meticulous approach to the Grey Man's supporting roles, ensuring every minor character possesses distinctive physical presence regardless of screen time allocated. The film's second unit director Spiro Rosatos, known for the Fast and Furious franchise's practical stunts, designed the tram crash sequence using real trams modified with remote control systems that allowed precise crash timing without risking cast safety unnecessarily. The film's relationship to the COVID-19 pandemic appears in crowd shots where Bangkok Songkran Festival includes noticeably fewer participants than pre-pandemic celebrations, an unintentional artifact that became permanent historical documentation of how the pandemic reduced public gatherings worldwide. The film's VOD release date occurred 45 days after the streaming premiere, a window that Netflix shortened from previous 80-day windows in response to changing exhibition patterns across the industry following pandemic disruptions. The film's Blu-ray release includes 30 minutes of deleted scenes, including extended dialogue between Fitzroy and Cahill that would have given Thornton and Woodard more screen time to develop their characters' shared history before the explosion ended both arcs permanently. The film's screenplay by Joe Russo, Christopher Marcus, and Stephen McFeely represents the first non-Marvel collaboration between these writers since the Captain America trilogy concluded with Endgame in 2019. The film's franchise potential depends entirely on sequel viewership numbers, with Netflix historically canceling planned franchises when opening week engagement fails to justify subsequent investment regardless of critical reception or audience satisfaction metrics measured in traditional surveys. The film's thematic preoccupation with fathers and surrogate fathers manifests in every major character relationship, from Cortland's abusive biological father to Fitzroy's nurturing mentorship to Hansen's complete absence of paternal influence, explaining his sociopathic inability to form protective attachments. Six's repeated pattern of rescuing children, first his brother from their father and later Claire from Hansen, suggests that his entire adult identity formed around that single moment of violent intervention, repeating the same emotional girbun with different characters across decades of CIA service. Fitzroy's recruitment speech includes the phrase, "You remind me of someone I couldn't save," a line of dialogue that implies a previous protege whose death haunts Fitzroy and explains why he risks so much to protect Six from Carmichael's disposal protocols. The film's treatment of Carmichael as a bureaucratic villain rather than a physical threat represents a deliberate choice to distinguish this franchise from Bond villains who personally engage in fisticuffs, recognizing that modern evil more often wears suits than combat gear in contemporary power structures. Hansen's mockery of Six's prison background throughout their cat-and-mouse chase reveals class anxiety embedded within intelligence agencies, where Ivy League graduates like Carmichael and Hansen view prison-recruited operatives as useful tools rather than equal colleagues deserving professional respect. The film's representation of Prague draws on the city's cinematic history as a stand-in for Paris, Vienna, and Berlin in countless films, using its architectural ambiguity to suggest a European urban landscape that belongs nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. Cahill's apartment building, located in Prague's Vinohrady district, was constructed during the Austro-Hungarian Empire's final decades, its ornate facade representing a vanished world where espionage meant Vienna rather than Vienna, London, and Langley competing for the same human sources across contested borders. The film's use of Christmas lights in Prague's Old Town Square, visible during the shootout sequence, establishes a temporal setting of December, even though the film's internal timeline suggests mere days have passed since Bangkok's Songkran Festival in April. Six's improvised tourniquet after Lone Wolf's attack uses his own belt, a field medicine technique that demonstrates training beyond mere weapons proficiency and suggests the Sierra program included comprehensive combat medicine instruction before deploying its operators. The film's representation of the CIA's Langley headquarters includes the distinctive 7-story atrium built during the 1960s expansion, a brutalist architectural space whose concrete massing suggests institutional permanence that survives any individual director's corruption or career termination. Miranda's professional wardrobe shifts from CIA standard business attire in Bangkok to tactical gear in Prague to a hybrid outfit in the finale, her clothing evolution mirroring her psychological transformation from institutional loyalist to gray operative unwilling to let bureaucratic rules prevent ethical action. The film's sound design during Cahill's explosion uses a moment of absolute silence before the blast, a technique that creates anticipatory tension while giving audiences physiological warning that prevents startled responses from overwhelming subsequent comprehension. Hansen's Croatian mansion includes a security room where 18 monitors display camera feeds from every building entrance, revealing his paranoid understanding that his methods have created enemies who would kill him given any opportunity to bypass his defenses. The film's climactic maze sequence required the construction of 120 meters of hedgerow on a Zagreb soundstage, each meter containing internal steel armature allowing hedges to withstand actor impacts without toppling onto performers during fight choreography. Six's decision to stop fighting Hansen when Claire runs to him, lowering his fists even though Hansen remains armed nearby, demonstrates that his protective instincts override his survival instincts, a character choice that distinguishes heroes from anti-heroes in action cinema's moral landscape. The film's treatment of Brewer as a character who serves no master, but her own career advancement positions her as the film's most honest character, admitting openly that she operates from self-interest while Carmichael and Hansen cloak their ambitions in patriotic language about national security imperatives. Brewer's killing of Hansen occurs while his back is turned, a tactical choice that would violate any code of honor, but aligns perfectly with her character's pragmatic understanding that fair fights are for people who care about fairness more than results. Carmichael's reaction to Hansen's death, visible only as a micro-expression on Page's face for approximately 2 seconds of screen time, communicates relief that an embarrassing liability has been eliminated combined with fear that Brewer now possesses leverage she will not hesitate to use against him. The film's final scene at CIA headquarters shows fluorescent lighting that casts no shadows, a deliberate visual choice suggesting that institutions claiming transparency and accountability actually produce the flattest, most sterile environments where nothing genuine can survive. Six's escape vehicle, a 1973 Chevrolet Chevelle Malibu, represents American automotive design from an era before computers controlled engines, a machine whose simplicity matches Six's operational preferences for analog solutions to problems others overcomplicate with digital technology. The film's title's third meaning references the gray propaganda used by intelligence agencies to influence foreign publics without revealing the source of disinformation, a technique Carmichael employs when he frames Dining Car as a traitor to avoid admitting the Sierra program ever existed beyond deniable oral histories. Six's refusal to accept Fitzroy's extraction offer in the film's first act demonstrates character consistency across the entire runtime, as he rejects every institutional solution offered, from Carmichael's evacuation to Brewer's partnership to the Lone Wolf's temporary alliance. The film's representation of the Songkran festival's religious elements includes brief shots of Buddha statues being washed with scented water, a purification ritual whose meaning comments ironically on Sikh's inability to wash away the moral compromises his profession requires despite his best efforts to maintain boundaries. Cahill's decryption equipment includes a 1995 PowerBook laptop running modified software, a technological anachronism that suggests the best codebreakers prefer older machines whose architectures are fully understood rather than contemporary devices with unknown backdoors built by manufacturers cooperating with intelligence agencies. The film's airport sequence, cut from the theatrical release but restored for the director's cut, would have shown Sikhs escaping through Vienna's Schwechat airport using a hijacked baggage cart in a sequence Hargrave choreographed before budget cuts moved the action to Prague's main train station instead. Hansen's nickname for Sikhs throughout the film is Sixer, a diminutive that carries condescension appropriate to their hierarchical relationship, while also suggesting sports team camaraderie that Hansen cynically deploys to mask his genuine contempt for prison-recruited talent. The film's representation of the lone wolf's Indian nationality includes no stereotypical accent or cultural signifiers beyond his martial arts style, a deliberate choice to avoid the racist caricatures that plagued earlier Hollywood representations of South Asian characters in action films. Sikh's final words to Miranda before escaping are, "Thank you for believing me." 3 words that carry the emotional weight of a man who has spent 18 years being disbelieved by handlers, supervisors, and colleagues who assumed prison recruits must be liars. The film's post-credits scene, filmed but deleted when test audiences found it confusing, would have shown Carmichael meeting with a consortium representative whose face remained obscured, establishing a shadowy organization that future installments could develop into worthy adversaries for Sikh's particular skill set. The film's box office performance, measured in hours viewed rather than dollars grossed, represents a paradigm shift in how success is measured for action films released by streaming platforms that prioritize subscriber retention over theatrical revenue generation. The film's comparison to Red Notice is inevitable given both films share Netflix distribution, $100 million budgets, and A-list casts playing morally compromised characters in international settings with franchise ambitions that neither film fully realized despite strong opening week viewership numbers. Sikh's final escape from custody uses a maintenance tunnel beneath CIA headquarters that was added to the building during the 1990s renovation, a factual detail that the film's researchers discovered and incorporated into the screenplay for audiences familiar with Langley's architectural history. The film's representation of Claire's pacemaker as both life-saving medical device and fatal tracking beacon comments on the double-edged nature of all technology, which serves human needs while creating vulnerabilities that malevolent actors can exploit against those same humans needing protection. Hansen's waterfront mansion in Croatia was actually a combination of 3 different locations, with exterior shots filmed at a castle near Dubrovnik, interior shots filmed on a Prague soundstage, and maze shots filmed in Zagreb, demonstrating how films assemble coherent spaces from geographically disparate components. The film's weapon handling protocol required every actor to treat firearms as live even during rehearsal, with certified armorers present on set whenever weapons appeared. A safety culture that prevented accidents despite thousands of rounds fired during production across all filming locations. 6 tactical reloads during shootouts occur exactly when his weapon would need fresh ammunition based on the firearm's capacity, a detail invisible to most viewers, but appreciated by firearms enthusiasts who criticize action films where protagonists fire unlimited rounds from standard capacity magazines without reloading. The film's blood squibs, practical effects that simulate bullet impacts, used compressed air rather than explosive charges after the first week of filming, reducing risk to actors while maintaining visual impact through careful editing and sound design that sells the effect. The film's Czech filming locations provided tax incentives worth approximately 20% of local spending, a factor that influenced the decision to set significant sequences in Prague despite the screenplay's original intention to set those scenes in Warsaw for specific narrative reasons that changed during pre-production. The film's representation of intelligence community acronyms includes SAD, NCS, and OGA, terms that audiences unfamiliar with CIA structure might miss but that reward knowledgeable viewers with verisimilitude, demonstrating the filmmakers conducted genuine research beyond Wikipedia-level understanding of American espionage apparatus. 6 prison number 846,732 appears on his file in Carmichael's office, a background detail that eagle-eyed viewers noticed during freeze-frame analysis, demonstrating how production designers hide narrative information in plain sight for audiences willing to pause and examine frames carefully. The film's finale hedge maze includes a center fountain shaped like a compass rose, a navigational symbol whose irony is that the maze's design makes compass directions useless because hedges block sightlines to stars and walls prevent walking straight toward any destination regardless of cardinal knowledge. Hansen's death scene originally included a monologue about Carmichael's consortium connections, but Evans suggested cutting the dialogue during editing because Hansen would not waste his final words on exposition when he could instead die silently with the secrets he promised to protect. The film's final shot composition mirrors the opening shot of young Cortland in his prison cell, with both frames showing a protagonist behind barriers that separate them from freedom. But the final shot's barriers are Six's choice rather than externally imposed. Representing character growth across the narrative's emotional arc, Six Chevrolet Chevelle carries Ohio license plates registered to a deceased CIA officer, whose name appears on the memorial wall at Langley, a detail suggesting that Six's cover identity appropriates the legal existence of someone who died in service rather than inventing a fictional person whole cloth. The film's representation of the Songkran festival includes the traditional plastering of Buddha images with scented water mixed with flower petals, a ritual whose visual beauty contrasts with the violence occurring simultaneously, creating dissonance between Thailand's peaceful spiritual traditions and the CIA's bloody operational requirements. The film's closing music, a reprise of Jackman's main theme with added choral elements, suggests heroic triumph even though the narrative concludes with corruption unpunished, justice undelivered, and the protagonist driving away from rather than toward any resolution of the systemic problems the film identified over its 2-hour runtime. The film's place in action cinema history will ultimately depend on whether the announced sequel materializes, as first installments of franchises are often re-evaluated after later entries provide context for choices that seem puzzling or incomplete within the standalone viewing experience. The film's narrative structure follows a classical 5-act format, with the Bangkok mission serving as inciting incident, the Vienna escape as rising action, the Prague massacre as midpoint reversal, the Croatian infiltration as climax preparation, and the hedge maze as true climax before a denouement that refuses traditional resolution. Six's character arc moves from reluctant assassin imprisoned by duty to willing fugitive choosing protection over obedience, a transformation measured not in dialogue, but in the decreasing number of times he looks to Fitzroy, Miranda, or Cahill for guidance about what to do next in rapidly evolving situations. The film's treatment of the CIA as an institution without moral compass reflects post-Snowden disillusionment with intelligence agencies, presenting an organization where oversight committees exist only to approve whatever directors have already decided to do regardless of legal constraints or ethical considerations. Carmichael's repeated use of the phrase national security to justify every action, from murder to kidnapping to evidence tampering, demonstrates how bureaucratic language launders criminality by attaching noble purposes to ignoble methods throughout the agency's chain of command. Hansen's background as a disgraced former agent is never fully explained, a deliberate omission suggesting that his sociopathy existed before his CIA employment, and that the agency merely channeled rather than created his capacity for cruelty toward acceptable targets rather than random victims. The film's visual motif of reflections appears in every major location, with Six glimpsed in water, glass, mirrors, and polished metal surfaces, visual reminders that the gray man leaves no photograph and no consistent image for enemies to recognize across different operational environments. Bangkok's opening action sequence establishes Six's tactical philosophy of controlled engagement, where he enters combat zones knowing exactly how many rounds remain in each magazine and how many seconds each opponent requires to neutralize before the next threat emerges from the crowded festival streets. Dining Car's final words include the phrase, "They eat their own," a warning that the Sierra program consumes its operatives as surely as any hostile intelligence service, simply slower and with more paperwork to justify the disposal of assets who outlive their operational usefulness to current leadership. The USB drive's encryption key, written on a piece of paper Dining Car swallows before dying, requires Cahill to perform an autopsy on his corpse, a grisly detail that the film presents as matter-of-fact intelligence work rather than morbid spectacle for audience revulsion. Fitzroy's decision to authorize Six's extraction team murder, knowing Six will survive because he trained Six personally, represents the film's most morally complex moment, where loyalty requires betraying the people who expect loyalty in order to protect the people who deserve protection more urgently. Miranda's character backstory includes a failed mission in Minsk where 3 team members died because she followed protocol rather than her instincts, explaining why she eventually chooses 6 methods over Carmichael's orders despite career consequences that could end her agency employment permanently. The film's Prague Square shootout includes a moment where 6 shields a Czech police officer whose weapon has jammed, saving the life of someone who would arrest him given the opportunity. A gesture that reveals 6 distinguishes between institutional enemies and individual humans in ways his opponents never bothered to consider. The tram chase sequence, running approximately 6 minutes from crash to escape, required 3 weeks of filming using 6 identical trams modified for camera access, crash safety, and remote operation during the most dangerous moments of the choreographed collision. Lone Wolf's fighting style incorporates the Indian martial art of Marma Adi, which targets specific pressure points to disable opponents without killing them, explaining why Six and Miranda survive their encounter despite being clearly outmatched by Dhanush's character throughout their hospital confrontation. Hansen's Croatian mansion includes a surveillance room where monitors display camera feeds from Bangkok, Vienna, and Prague, revealing that he has been watching Six's entire journey rather than merely responding to each development after receiving Carmichael's delayed intelligence reports about Six's movements. The hedge maze sequence was inspired by the garden maze at Villa Pisani in Stra, Italy, where Napoleon once became lost, a historical reference that adds literary depth to the film's climactic confrontation between order-seeking Six and chaos-creating Hansen. Six's final hand-to-hand victory over Hansen comes not through superior martial technique, but through willingness to absorb a killing blow in order to deliver one, sacrificing his own safety for the opportunity to end the fight permanently regardless of personal cost. Brewer's decision to kill Hansen rather than arrest him demonstrates the film's thesis that institutions cannot reform corrupted individuals because corrupted individuals have learned to use institutional processes to protect themselves from accountability at every level of review. Carmichael's final scene shows him deleting files from his secure server, a task that takes approximately 30 seconds of screen time, but implies hours of digital housekeeping as he removes evidence connecting him to Hansen's bounty, the Sierra program's termination, and the consortium's payments for services rendered. The film's post-credits scene, described in the screenplay but never filmed due to budget overruns during the pandemic production shutdown, would have shown Fitzroy alive in a Croatian hospital, his death faked to protect him from consortium retaliation while he recovers from wounds that will leave him using a cane permanently. Six's escape vehicle, the 1973 Chevrolet Chevelle, was chosen because its engine can be started without electronic keys, its doors open without electronic locks, and its location cannot be tracked without physical surveillance, representing analog freedom in a digital world where every electronically mediated action leaves traces that agencies like Carmichael's can follow to anyone using modern transportation. The film's sound design during Cahill's explosion includes the sound of her pacemaker flatlining blended with the explosion's shockwave, a sonic metaphor suggesting her heart stops exactly as the building detonates, her death serving as heartbeat that ends the scene's rhythmic structure with finality that leaves no doubt about survival. Six's reaction to Fitzroy's death includes no tears and no dialogue, only a slight slackening of his jaw muscles visible for less than 1 second before his face returns to neutral professionalism, demonstrating Gosling's ability to communicate profound grief through minimal facial movement that rewards close attention. The film's representation of international travel includes passport control sequences, showing Six using identities stolen from deceased individuals, a technique real intelligence operatives employ to move across borders without leaving traces in databases that hostile services might monitor for patterns of unusual movement. Hansen's collection of antique torture devices, visible in his Croatian mansion's basement during the film's third act, includes instruments from medieval Europe, feudal Japan, and colonial America, suggesting his interest in causing pain transcends cultural boundaries and temporal periods with equal enthusiasm for all methods of human suffering. The film's treatment of physical pain emphasizes Six's tolerance rather than invulnerability, showing him bandaging wounds, limping after fights, and requiring Miranda's assistance to walk after Lone Wolf's attack, humanizing the protagonist through vulnerability that superhero action films typically avoid showing their heroes experiencing in real time. Carmichael's office at Langley includes photographs of him with 3 different directors of Central Intelligence, suggesting political skill at surviving leadership changes by aligning with whoever currently holds power regardless of party affiliation or policy preferences. The film's script underwent revisions specifically to reduce Six's dialogue after Gosling suggested his character would speak less frequently than the original draft depicted, trusting cinematography and performance to communicate information that screenwriters typically place in characters' mouths for audience convenience. The film's casting of Dhanush as Lone Wolf followed his acclaimed performance in the Tamil film Azuran, where he played a father protecting his daughter from corrupt authorities, a role whose emotional register differs completely from the gray man's hired killer, but whose physical intensity attracted the Russos' attention during their international casting search for memorable antagonists. Six's final line of dialogue in the film is "Let's go," spoken to Claire as they drive away from the CIA's surveillance perimeter. 2 words that reject the franchise's potential future in favor of present freedom from institutional control over his movements and choices. The film's representation of Margaret Cahill as a terminally ill woman who chooses her death's timing and method represents geriatric agency rarely depicted in action films, where older characters typically die helplessly or sacrificially without the dignity of choosing how their stories end on their own terms. The film's exploration of surveillance technology presents it as a double-edged sword that protects and endangers equally, with Claire's pacemaker representing medical progress that saves lives while creating vulnerabilities that turn patients into trackable assets for anyone with the right electronic access. Six's tactical decision to avoid killing civilians during the Bangkok mission establishes a moral boundary that every subsequent action sequence tests more severely, placing him in situations where clean hands become increasingly impossible to maintain without abandoning mission objectives entirely. The film's production designer Gassner created distinct color palettes for each character's spaces, with Six inhabiting blue-gray environments, Fitzroy occupying warm amber spaces, Carmichael ruling over cold white offices, and Hansen residing in deep green luxury that suggests money without taste throughout every frame he occupies. Young Cortland's Florida prison cell includes a single window showing the sky, a visual element that recurs throughout the film whenever Six feels trapped by circumstances beyond his control, reminding audiences that physical confinement ended when he accepted Fitzroy's offer, but psychological imprisonment continued across 18 years of operational service. The film's representation of the Songkran Festival's water-throwing tradition as tactical cover demonstrates how the Russos integrate authentic cultural practices with action requirements rather than treating foreign locations as interchangeable backdrops for generic chase sequences that could occur anywhere with the same visual results. Dining Car's death scene occurs beside a Bangkok canal where floating flower offerings drift past his body. Traditional Buddhist merit-making rituals continuing around his corpse as Thai citizens observe their religious obligations while a CIA asset bleeds out on concrete beside them. Miranda's career damage from the Bangkok mission includes reassignment to a desk job monitoring communications intercepts, a punishment that explains her desperation to retrieve Six and regain Carmichael's approval before her professional irrelevance becomes permanent within the agency's internal promotion tracking systems. The encrypted drive's physical casing includes a GPS transmitter Carmichael activates remotely after Dining Car's death, explaining how Hansen's teams track Six across Europe without needing to intercept his communications or bribe his contacts for travel itinerary information. Cahill's Prague apartment building was constructed in 1898 as a residential hotel for German-speaking civil servants serving the Austro-Hungarian Empire, its design emphasizing security through multiple entrance checkpoints and staircases that allow residents to enter and exit without passing through common areas visible to neighbors. The film's Vienna nightclub sequence includes authentic electronic dance music produced by Austrian DJ Parav Steller, whose contribution to the soundtrack grounds the scene in local musical culture rather than generic club tracks that could accompany similar scenes in Berlin, London, or Ibiza without geographical specificity. Sosa's betrayal of Six occurs via text message sent while Six uses the restroom, a mundane technological detail that makes the betrayal feel contemporary rather than relying on dramatic confrontation, where Sosa would announce his treachery with theatrical dialogue before drawing a weapon on his former client. Hansen's arrival in Vienna aboard a Gulfstream G650ER, the longest-range business jet available commercially, establishes his access to resources that Carmichael's official CIA budget could not authorize, suggesting consortium funding supplements his contract income throughout the film's timeline. The bounty Hansen places on Six appears on dark web marketplace BetaBay, a fictional platform whose design parodies eBay's familiar interface while listing human beings as products whose capture and delivery entitle contractors to cryptocurrency payments released from escrow upon confirmation of completion. Miranda's rescue of Six in Vienna occurs in a parking garage whose brutalist concrete architecture was featured in the 2005 film The Bourne Supremacy, creating intertextual connection between The Gray Man and the franchise whose influence appears throughout the Russo's action direction style. The car journey from Vienna to Prague takes approximately 3 hours of real driving time, but compresses into 90 seconds of screen time. A pacing decision that prioritizes character development over travelogue and assumes audiences understand European geography well enough to accept temporal ellipsis without establishing shots of passing borders. Cahill's terminal pancreatic cancer diagnosis appears on medical documents visible in her apartment, listing her prognosis as 4 to 6 months with palliative care only, contextualizing her willingness to detonate her apartment, knowing she has little time left regardless of Hansen's assault. The decryption sequence in Cahill's apartment reveals Carmichael's communications with consortium handler coded as Control, a designation that mirrors how Soviet intelligence referred to Moscow Center handlers during Cold War operations, suggesting the consortium's operational methods derive from Soviet tradecraft adapted for contemporary geopolitical conditions. Lone Wolf's introduction during Cahill's apartment assault includes no dialogue for his first 90 seconds of screen time, communicating entirely through physical performance and the distinctive green-tinted POV shots of his night vision goggles that distinguish his perspective from every other character in the film's visual vocabulary. The Prague Square shootout required coordinating 150 extras playing police officers, 50 stunt performers playing Hansen's contractors, and 30 special effects technicians managing squibs, bullet hits, and debris explosions across a location filmed over 4 consecutive nights to maintain lighting continuity through every shot of the sequence. Six's tram escape includes a moment where he leaps between moving cars at 40 kilometers per hour, a stunt performed by Gosling's double Troy James without digital augmentation, demonstrating the production's commitment to practical effects whenever safety protocols allow genuine risk-taking by professional stunt performers. The hospital pacemaker tracking sequence required Ana de Armas to learn genuine cardiology terminology and stethoscope technique, acting choices that sell her character's medical impersonation convincingly enough that actual healthcare professionals have praised the scene's accuracy on social media following the film's release. Lone Wolf's defeat of Six and Miranda uses the Indian martial art of Kalaripayatti's grounding techniques, which emphasize controlling opponents through joint locks and pressure points rather than striking them unconscious, explaining why both protagonists survive their encounter despite being clearly outmatched throughout the hospital confrontation. Hansen's Croatian mansion exterior was filmed at Fort Lavrjenac in Dubrovnik, a Venetian fortress that appeared as King's Landing in Game of Thrones, creating geographic continuity between 2 major franchise productions filmed at the same Adriatic location with different production designers emphasizing different architectural features of the same stone walls. The Hedge Maze's center fountain features a statue of the Greek god Hermes, patron of travelers, thieves, and messengers, whose winged sandals symbolize the speed and cunning Six requires to navigate the maze while protecting Claire from Hansen's pursuit through identical-looking hedgerow corridors designed to confuse directional sense completely for anyone entering without prior knowledge of the maze's layout pattern. Fitzroy's death scene in the wine cellar includes a close-up of a 1982 Chateau Margaux bottle shattering during the gunfight, a vintage whose value exceeds $10,000 and whose destruction symbolizes the Fitzgerald family wealth accumulated during his CIA career that cannot purchase safety for himself or his niece when Hansen decides to target them as leverage against Six's cooperation with Carmichael's retrieval demands. The hand-to-hand combat between Six and Hansen incorporates Krav Maga techniques developed by Israeli intelligence services for close-quarters neutralization of threats in confined spaces where firearms cannot be deployed safely without endangering friendly personnel or innocent bystanders trapped nearby. Brewer's kill shot strikes Hansen in the upper chest before he can reach the throwing knife concealed in his boot, A detail visible only in slow-motion playback that reveals Hansen's backup plan would have killed Six even after losing the hand-to-hand fight if Brewer had arrived seconds later than her opportune moment for intervening. Carmichael's final phone call from the consortium handler uses voice modulation technology that prevents any identification of the speaker's gender, age, or national origin, a production choice suggesting the shadow government's power derives from anonymity rather than individual leadership that could be targeted or exposed by congressional oversight committees investigating corruption allegations. The handler's instructions to Carmichael include the phrase, "Clean your desk or we will clean it for you," a threat whose double meaning applies equally to physical office organization and the elimination of personnel whose continued employment threatens consortium operational security following Hansen's death and the drive's decryption by Cahill before her sacrifice. Six drive away from Claire's secure location uses back roads that avoid highway surveillance cameras, satellite observation, and border checkpoints, demonstrating escaped tradecraft that Carmichael's analysts will spend months trying to reconstruct from fragmentary evidence of vehicle sightings reported by local police across 3 different countries during the journey.